I'm driving by myself down the red, dusty desert. The horizon stretches out around me in every direction as far as the eye can see. And rising above it is the rainbow sunset of the desert. Blue goes to purple, goes to pink, goes to orange. I'm thinking I probably should pull over soon and find a camp for the night, but I don't want to, I'm having too much fun. So I keep driving. And as I do, the stars start to come out. The blue goes a deep blue, a midnight blue that gets deeper and richer. More stars come out, and slowly the orange fades below the horizon. And suddenly, bang! The engine cuts out. Fuck! I pull the car over on the side of the road. I can't start it. I open up the bonnet. I can't fix it. I'm hundreds of kilometres from any town. I have no phone reception. And I vowed that I would not drive along this road at night because a few years ago an English backpacker went missing and there's fears of a serial killer at loose. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just sleep in the back of my car, I'll lock the doors and hang on. If someone stops, I'm like in a fishbowl and if I'm scared of them, they know exactly where I am. I'm like, come and get me. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll go and camp in the bushes until the morning. And hang on now, if someone stops, they might strip my car, they might come looking for me, they might have a dog. I won't be able to sleep all night. So, okay, so I'm gonna have to hitch in the morning anyway, so why don't I just hitch now? All right. By now, there's blackness in every direction around me. And I know that as soon as a car stops, when I look in the window, I'll know straight away if I trust them or not. And if I don't, I'm completely exposed. I'm like, I'm here by myself, do what you want with me. Okay, so I rummage through the car and I get a bottle of wine and I neck it. Not all of it, not all of it. And then I pray. And eventually, the headlights of a car come piercing over the horizon, breaking the darkness, and my heart races. And I put my finger out reluctantly, I'm probably pulling this face as well, going, and then they fly right by me and I think, oh, thank God. I didn't have to deal with that situation. And then the second car comes by and it does exactly the same thing. Relief. Third car, fourth car. And then suddenly I realise that I'm as scary to them as they are to me. There's many stories of like people stopping to help a woman on the side of the road and then getting ambushed by people who jump out of the bushes. And so I just realised that the only person who's probably going to stop is the person I don't want to stop. And just as I realised that, the next car comes along and slows down and stops in front of me. Its brake lights light up the road. My heart's just pounding. It starts reversing towards me. And I walk to it a few steps and I look in the window and I see the faces of 4 black men looking out at me. And I think, oh, thank God. I knew I was safe. Now, why did I know I was safe with these 4 black men? I knew I was safe because I know them. I didn't know these exact guys. And what I knew about them was they probably take drugs. They're probably involved in violence. They probably have done or will do time in prison. But what I also knew about them was through their culture as young Aboriginal men, but there's a sense of community and responsibility for what happens on their land. There's a sense of belonging. And that's why I felt safe. Now, this was 14 years ago, and by that stage I'd been working as a neuroscientist for 5 years in Aboriginal communities across the top end and the central deserts of Australia. I'd been working with young Aboriginal men and women, mainly who were sniffing petrol and using other drugs. I've been looking into different drugs and how they affect the brain and different culturally relevant ways to assess brain function in Aboriginal people. 20 years ago, when I first landed in Arnhem Land, I was shocked at what I saw. I saw a world that I'd never imagined before, and this was in my own country, and that was the first time that I'd been exposed to it. Around that time, one of the first people I met was Muriel Joy Jarugba. Muriel's an Anandali woman from Groote Island. And in Muriel's culture, everybody and everything has a place, and that included me. And so as part of her culture, I was adopted. Her and I were quite close, and she adopted me as her sister. She called me Daddy Upper, little sister, and I call her Di Upper, meaning big sister. And over the next few months, Muriel and her people taught me so much about their culture. They taught me about their ways and their wisdom and their magic. They taught me about their black magic. And despite all my degrees, I felt like I had nothing that I could share with them, nothing of value. And then I thought of the internet. So I fired up my laptop computer and I opened up the website of this neuroscience research institute where I worked. And unbeknownst to me, they had this new website, and this was 20 years ago, so it was very flash for then. And this brain comes on the screen and it's spinning around and it says, this is your brain. This is the home of your creativity, your language, your thoughts and your emotions. And I was impressed. I looked over at my Anandiliaqua family and their jaws had hit the ground and they looked at me in disbelief and said, white magic? A few days later, I went to visit my big sister and she wasn't home, but one of her family members was there, a woman, and she was crying. And she'd had a fight with her husband and she was in a lot of emotional pain, so she'd taken a lot of painkillers. And it turns out a lot of the women were doing it at the time. They were taking a lot of painkillers to combat a lot of emotional pain. They were taking a lot of Panadol. And after making sure she was okay, I went on the internet and looked up what happens when you take too many painkillers and how many is too much. And I made posters with the information, with pictures and plain language, and I put them around the community. And it struck me that out on their communities, I had access to information from the outside world that they didn't. And not just because of my access to the internet, but because of how the information was presented. It was talking to me and not them. So there was a lot of translation that was required of the information to translate across the cultures. And there was a lot of assumptions, like knowing that painkillers are for physical pain and not emotional pain, and knowing that 2 is enough, and taking 2 tablets is enough, and more can be dangerous. Over many years of doing this work, I began to get more and more frustrated. We were trying to solve problems of addiction, but the problems went way deeper than that. I could see that Aboriginal people knew what they needed, they knew how to help themselves, but our system didn't allow them to tap into their own strengths and wisdoms. And these wisdoms went back 60,000 years. For example, our government put so much information into getting Aboriginal kids to school, but very little into new ways of learning that are more meaningful in their lives. 7 years ago, I was recruited to lead a national study on Aboriginal wellbeing. The goal was to develop a wellbeing framework from the ground up to measure Aboriginal values and ways of working so that they would have a voice in policy. We created a process called Interplay. Had to throw that in. That brings together the wisdoms of the black and the white worlds. So Interplay works in 3 main ways. First, we work in a shared space where all of the players, everything we do is conducted in the shared space between all of the groups. So in our team, the way this plays out is the Aboriginal community perspective is represented by Arrernte woman Tammy Abbott. The government perspective is represented by another Aboriginal woman, Jessica Yamaguchi. Jessica's a Waini and a Gungalita woman from the Gulf of Carpentaria in Queensland. But Jess now lives in Canberra and works for the Australian government. And with my neuroscience background, I represent the science. So us 3 women make sure that everything we do is conducted in the shared space between our groups, and everything has to make sense and be accessible across our different worlds. And the way that plays out is that we know that the government priorities when it comes to Aboriginal wellbeing is education, employment and health. They've invested very heavily in this over decades with very little impact. What we discovered by speaking to Aboriginal groups around Australia was that despite their cultural diversity, they all want the same 3 things: culture, empowerment and community. They want to be empowered to practice their own culture in a society that enables them to do so. They want the freedom to be themselves. The second way that Interplay works is by bringing together stories and numbers. And the reason we do this is because Aboriginal knowledge is held in stories and governments value evidence in numbers. So Interplay works to bring together the stories and numbers for the 2 worlds to meet. How does this play out in practice? So we spent several years collecting stories from Aboriginal people all around Australia. We asked about what they valued and what they wanted in life. We involved the community by employing and training 42 Aboriginal community researchers to work on the project. And they helped us break the stories down to themes and sub-themes, which we then translated into a wellbeing survey. They went and then administered that survey with 900 Aboriginal adults from their communities. We worked in 4 different Aboriginal communities across Northern Territory and Western Australia. So the next step was to analyse the data, to see how it all hangs together. Which brings me to the third way that Interplay works, which is in recognising interconnectedness. We understand that we all have a place, everything and everybody has a place. We all belong, everything and everybody is interrelated. And the way that we deal with that in our statistics is that we analyse our data at the whole of system level, rather than just looking at different parts of the puzzle on their own. And when we do that, we find that the strongest pathways to wellbeing are not in a straight line. There's many different pathways, strong pathways to wellbeing, and they all share one characteristic. They all start with culture. It all starts with culture. So how does that look in practice? So for decades, our governments have invested heavily in education and employment for Aboriginal people where they have to leave their culture behind. But Interplay imagines a different way. So come with me on this. Imagine a young Aboriginal girl, she grows up on her country, she learns her language, she learns her ways from her mothers and her aunties and her grandmothers. She learns about her ways, her wisdom and her magic. When she comes to school, she doesn't have to leave that behind. She brings it with her. She gets to tell the story of the rainbow serpent from her people. She gets to learn how to write it in her own language. Then she gets to learn to translate that into the English language. She does well at school, but not only that, she gets to teach other people about her culture. When she goes to work, she's strong. She works in a workplace that honours her culture, so when she has to take time off a ceremony, she doesn't lose her job. So she's strong in her culture, she's empowered, her community's empowered, her culture's empowered, she's healthy and she's well. So Interplay uses science to back up the Aboriginal stories so that governments know what to invest in so that everybody can be happy. And this isn't just about Aboriginal people because we all live within culture, we all seek empowerment, and we all live within community. And not only that, but the Interplay tool can be used by anybody wanting to solve problems based on shared values and vision, because it involves creating a shared space where all of the players can come together, can translate their knowledges, and then unify people and purpose so that everyone in the world has a chance to thrive, so that all people have the chance to be happy. Thank you.